Okay, so I said I was all done, but apparently I just have a couple more quick duties here. But at any rate, hope everyone enjoyed their lunch. Nice hour-and-a-half break. But yeah, now we got to focus a little bit here. So we've got our first presentation after lunch from Glenn Fox. Then we'll have a coffee break. So you got to pay attention for one presentation, then you can have another break. And so Glenn's gonna speak to us on the proposed amendments to the CSR standards, which people have heard various things about, I'm sure, and so Glenn, we're looking forward to that talk. And then after that, we've got Carrie Skelly and Kelly Larson giving us a very quick update. I see it's 5 minutes on the site profile and soil relocation discussion papers. And then Mike McFarland's going to chat with us about new initiatives. So we've got a good afternoon. So thank you very much to the ministry for joining us this afternoon and leading us through some presentations, and look forward to an active discussion on those. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Glenn Fox. All right, you get to try and make sure everyone stays awake. You can point people out if they're nodding.
Okay, thanks, Greg.
Right after lunch.
That. I appreciate the introduction. We actually have a tag team for you on the omnibus updating of the standards. So I'll kick off with an overview of what we're calling our decided elements, things that we've pretty much made up our mind that we want to propose. And then I'll give you a bit more detail for the people that are more technical, perhaps, and more interested in it, on how we're proposing to derive the soil invertebrate and plant matrix standards. So there's some changes there that people need to be aware of. And then Heather Oshkoff is going to talk to you about changes to Schedule 6, the water standards, and George will finish up with the new groundwater model and the new suite of soil to groundwater protection standards. And we don't have a lot of time to do it, so we'll just proceed. So let's see, where are we at here? What am I doing? I'm doing the update. Yeah, okay. So as a general comment, I think it was last fall, we gave a talk here and told you the concept that we were moving forward on omnibus updating of the standards, and how we had a particular date reserved in the minister's calendar in order to present proposed changes, and hopefully she would review them and approve them. And we have made progress towards that end since last year. We haven't actually been proceeding on kind of a blitzkrieg pace. In fact, a lot of it's been more like sitzkrieg than blitzkrieg. But we have made progress, and we have a very lot to do and not very much time left to do it. So we'll get into that a little bit more detail. But we do have now a total of 11 draft proposal papers that have been drafted. So we have a paper that deals with the changes to Schedule 4 standards. We have 3 papers that deal with changes to the Schedule 5 matrix standards. So we have a paper on how we would change the human health protective standards. We have another proposal paper on how we would change the environmental health protective standards. And we have a third paper that deals with the soil to groundwater protective standards of the matrices. Heather's going to talk to you about Schedule 6, the water quality standards. We have a paper that lists proposed changes to Schedule 7, the contaminated soil relocation standards. We have a paper on sediment quality standards, paper on Schedule 10, which are the exotic generic soil and drinking water standards. And finally, we have a paper that has some proposed changes related to the vapor standards. And we also have an overview omnibus paper, which is probably the only paper that most people will read, because the other papers are going to present these changes in much more detail than most people will want to know. So if you only have time to read one of the papers, read the overview paper. It'll give you the highlights. And we have another paper. The 11th paper deals with high-density residential standards. So we're going to bring those into effect, hopefully. So these proposal papers all follow the same standardized format. We have a front-end section that as succinctly as possible, list those changes that we're proposing to make as the Stage 10 amendment to the regulation. So that's the amendment that we have to date with the minister with for the end of April 2016. The rest of the paper presents the literature review, introduces what the changes are going to be in Stage 10, gives a rationale for those changes, but it also lists a whole bunch of additional changes that if we had more time and resources, we might make. So those additional changes are identified for the next cycle of omnibus updating. Those of you who heard my talk last fall will remember that the big win for me is not actually updating the standards, it's getting a commitment to updating standards on a scheduled ongoing basis. So every 5 years we would have an updating of the standards rather than the ad hoc process that we followed to date. You know, we've had nine amendments to the regulation. I think all but one of them has involved some degree of standards changing. But we have not been able to keep them really current. We've been focused on making amendments to high priority kind of changes. So this will be the first, since the standards were originally set back in 1995-96, this will be the first comprehensive, complete overhaul of the standards. Okay, so what are some of these decided elements that we've kind of decided that we would really like to propose? So the first one relates to the soil quality standards. So we're proposing to have a single schedule of soil standards now instead of the 3 schedules that we have now. We have Schedule 4 generic soil standards, we have Schedule 5 matrix standards, we have Schedule 10 exotic generic soil standards. We'd like to combine all of those into a single schedule. We're calling that Schedule X. And Heather asked me if she could call her combined water schedule W. I said, yeah, that's great. Yeah. X, Y, all we need now is a Z, and we're good to go. I digress here. Okay, so what are we doing? What are we doing for the matrix standards? We are proposing 2 types of residential standards now. So we have we'll have a low density residential standard and a high density residential standard. We propose to have purpose-derived wildland standards, new wildland standards in that matrix. And we propose to essentially revise all of the soil to groundwater protective standards. So I've got a mock-up here, if this thing works, there it is, of what that matrix might look like. So here's this pentachlorophenol. You see there's a new column for wildlands. Here, both human health and environmental health protection. There's a new column for low-density residential standards and a new column for high-density residential standards. By the way, this is about as big as as wide as I can make the matrix, because the registrar regulations has rules about formatting. So you're not allowed to have a pull-out schedule out of your regulation where you pull it out and unfold it and look at it. They have rules. So this is about it. I couldn't fit any more land use standards on there if I wanted to. This is about as wide as it can get. So that's it in a nutshell for the matrix standards. Because we're combining them all together, we're going to still have matrix standards. We'll still have generic standards. So we're going to move some of the substances from Schedule 4 into Schedule 5 and create new matrices for those substances that move over. We want to update all of the Schedule 10 standards, and we want to combine those with the residual Schedule 4 standards that don't get converted into matrices into what we're calling Part 2 of the matrix, which will be a listing of generic soil standards for human health. And then there's going to be a Part 3, which is generic soil standards for ecological health. And I have a mock-up of that for you too. So this is going to be Part 2, human health standards. Oh, I didn't want to make that bigger. Hang on a sec here, sorry. Let's see if we can make it smaller. Okay, maybe we can't. Anyway, there we go. There we go. Okay, now let's try and center this thing now. Oh, great. Blow it up. That's good. Okay, can people see that? That's a little better. Okay, so all of these substances you're seeing here, they're all prescribed under the CSR, and they're all from Schedule 10, but as we go down, you will start to see some of these ones that are in red that have been ported in from the existing Schedule 4 to make that combined schedule. And don't pay attention to any of these numbers at this point. They've all got little question marks with them. So you won't have to search 3 or 4 different schedules in the reg now for soil standards. In theory, they'll all be in one place, although they'll be different parts. Okay, so for Schedule 7, we're going to propose repealing Schedule 7 in its entirety. Schedule 7 is the schedule that deals with contaminated soil relocation agreements. So that proposal paper, I did a redraft of Part 8 of the CSR that deals with contaminated soil relocation. So rather than have a specific schedule for soil relocation, what we're going to do is change the language so it refers to the appropriate applicable soil standards at the receiving site. And that those applicable standards will be effectively Schedule X. Okay. Water standards, I'm not going to talk about those at all because Heather's going to give you a talk on that in a minute or two. Sediment standards, we had hoped to update these standards. Unfortunately, in order to do that, we would have to have some contract dollars because the database that's used with the standards, the criteria, the sediment criteria are based on is a proprietary database, so we need to hire a certain individual to make those changes for us. And we probably don't have enough money in our budget. At least that's the thinking at this particular point in time. So probably actual updating of the numerical sediment standards will port over to the next cycle of standards review. However, we do want to change the name. Right now, their sediment criteria, the difference between criteria and a standard is that a standard is a legally enforceable concentration. A criteria is a point of departure to developing a legally enforceable concentration. And the reason we want to change them from sediment criterion to sediment standards is because that's the way everybody uses them. We've never had a single case where somebody said, I want to take that criteria and develop a legally enforceable concentration for application at my specific site. Everybody simply uses those criteria as if they were standards and cleans up sediment if they're doing it on a numerical basis as opposed to a risk assessment basis. They will clean it up to meet the criteria. So we may as well call it what it is. It is, in fact, a standard, so we'll make that change. Vapor standards, we're looking to perhaps incorporate either a whole new column of standards in Schedule 11 for parkades, or we might, because the exposure scenario that's on parkades are based is very close to the industrial exposure scenario, so we may simply add a footnote that says if you've got a parkade, it's not residential, it's industrial vapor standards that apply. We're kind of torn between that. Some people like the idea of having a discrete set of parkade standards, and everybody will know that, and you'll see it on your certificate, parkade standard, as opposed to just using industrial. But hey, we're going to have stakeholder comment. They'll tell us what they want, so good. All the standards will be updated based on the most current toxicity reference values we can find. And there will be some new substances brought into the regulation. These are emerging contaminants of concerns, things like PFOS and estradiol, that aren't currently prescribed in the regulation, aren't currently listed in any schedule. We'll be adding those to one or more schedules in the regulation. Now, just doing the standards isn't the end of the story. Once we've got the standards in hand, there's a bunch of consequential changes and amendments that need to be made. So, for example, if we're going to have 2 different residential standards, one for low density, one for high density, we have to change, at a minimum, we have to change the definition for residential land use in Section 1. of the CSR. And we have some changes we have to make to Section 11 that deals with standards that are used to define a contaminated site. This is particularly important in regards to wildlands because right now we use surrogate standards for wildlands. We use parkland and sometimes agricultural standards as if they were wildlands, but we're going to have purpose-derived wildland standards, so we have to change that definition in that section. We also have to change it in the section of the reg, section 17, that talks about standard use for remediation. I already mentioned the changes to Part 8, contaminated soil relocation, how we're going to blitz the schedule altogether and change the wording in that particular part. And all of this will, of course, these changes in standards will trickle down and change things like standardized templates for instruments. And what's particularly key are some protocols that need to be modified, rejigged, and up to speed and ready to go when the standards are made. So everybody knows that Protocol 11, the upper caps, are all based on the standards. We have new standards, you got to have new upper cap values, so all that's got to be done as well. Because of the changes in the groundwater model, those significantly different changes, that means we're going to have to go back and make sure that those parts of screening level risk assessment and P2, Protocol 2, site-specific soil standards reflect those changes, those parameters that have been changed in the groundwater model. So that has to be done. In theory, we have to, yeah, we're getting this way. This is starting to get it. In theory, we should also be updating a whole slew of technical guidance 3, technical guidance 4, technical guidance 13, 18, 19, procedures, be new definitions, new acronyms that pop up. You'll see that in my next talk. There's a couple of acronyms that have to be added. Procedures, procedure 12, procedure for preparing the instruments, the trickle-down effect on those instruments. And finally, there are even other regulations under EMA that if we change the CSR standards, those regulations need to change their standards. Example for that is hazardous waste, where both the hazardous waste reg and CSR reg are still using the antediluvian NATO 1991 TCDD-TEFs, despite the fact they've been internationally updated 2 times since 1991. And as part of the update, we're going to change over to the World Health 2006, the current TCD-TEFs, which means that hazardous waste has to make that change for toxins and furans in their reg. And for OMAR, organic matter recycling regulation, they use virtually all of the contaminated site standards. So if we change our standards, they're going to have to do a consequential amendment and change all the standards in their reg. Okay, so how much time do we have to do all of this? Not a lot. So by July the 6th, we hope to have these draft proposal papers posted to the web for public comment, about a 2-month comment period. During that time, we'll have some focus stakeholder consultations with focus stakeholders. We have a lot of stakeholders. Okay, I won't draw it out anymore. This is as dramatic as we can make it. But yeah, there's a lot of stakeholders and a lot of proposal papers that people might have an interest in, right? So some of these folks undoubtedly are going to want to have face-to-face, one-on-one discussions about these proposal papers. So we're prepared to do that in this 2-month window of public stakeholder review on the draft documents. Once we get that stakeholder review, we'll spend a month, looking at the comments that we receive, and we'll finalize them. And then we'll post the finalized papers to the website for your information, not for additional comment, just for your information. So we heard what you said, here's the changes that we made, this is what we want to go forward with. If we had more time, I would have another round of consultation. I don't have enough time to do that. So I know it's the middle of summer. I know it couldn't be a worse time to be asking people to give comment. When these things come to the web, please give us comment, okay? Because that's really your well, it's like your absolute last chance, but that'll be the most useful chance for you to do it. So in October, we got those finalized ones posted, and everybody starts crunching numbers. In fact, I'm sure that Canadian Fuels and CAP and all you consultants out there are going to be busy crunching numbers. The minute those draft proposal papers become finalized, you'll be getting calls. Can you crunch the numbers for me for substance X, Y, Z? In fact, you guys will probably have the numbers done before I do. So I guess that's good for business, right, Greg? Greg's not going to comment on that. Got some clients in the room there, Greg? Never mind. Okay, so once we have the numbers crunched, in about December, we will find a conference somewhere and put a few of them out there for examples for the general public primarily. And then we will have a last-ditch kind of stakeholder consultation, so people who really, really hate a particular number can let us know, and we can see what we can do to accommodate you. Beginning in January, we'll prep the minister's package. This is the MO package. So beginning in the new year, we get involved with drafting lawyers and, strategic policy folks and all the rest of that kind of stuff. And hopefully by that date when the minister is set aside for us here, we'll have a package all ready for her to look at, think about, hopefully approve, and roll them out on May the 6th. So I have one slide that's duplicate from my last talk to you guys on this topic. And this time I really mean it. Part of the reason we haven't made more progress than we have is because we've all been very, very busy. And unfortunately, we are easily sidetracked. So we have to fix that. We have to focus more on getting this work done if we're going to get it done and not disappoint our minister. So definitely expect delays in normal risk assessment work, because all the risk assessors are going to be working flat out on this stuff for at least the next 6 months. So that's the take-home message for that. Great. Do you want me to take questions now or wait until I've done the second one and people can ask me on both of them? Okay. Anybody have a general question or advice in regards to that proposal? Oh, Ross does. Okay, Ross.
When the standards go out in May,
Yep.
will there be a grandfathering period that's...
Generally, you don't have a grandfathering period. It's not like protocols where we can anticipate that. Typically, our lawyer has told us that legislation and regulation is a little different. There's a bright line in the sand, and what was in effect yesterday is in effect today. So it's difficult for them to do that. I guess we'll have a chat with our drafting lawyers and see to what extent that can happen, but I wouldn't anticipate that if I were you. I would assume on May 6th, the world changes and all the standards that are changed and in effect. Change is a good thing. Oh, Beth. Yeah, that'll be part of the proposal paper. So the proposal papers actually talk about the sources where we get the data from. We are going to have to set a point in time. We have the hierarchy. I mean, the general hierarchy we'll follow would be that which is in TG7 for sources. But we are going to have to set a date and time at which all of those TRVs are frozen from there on in to give us time to actually calculate them. We can't be in November, and because dimethyl doorknobs TRV change, we have to go back and recalculate it. We're past that point. So there'll be a point where those TRVs are frozen in time. But yeah, don't worry about it. We'll let you know. Everybody will know where they came from and what they are.
You're not talking about, I'm talking about the database behind the TRVs, but you're looking at canned TRVs.
Well, basically,
or
yeah.
both. I guess the water might be more data-based.
Well, yeah, it is primarily canned stuff, as in we'll take them from the sources identified in TG7 and use them for our own purposes in spreadsheets. I don't know that we'll give you a complete listing, right? We'll tell you where we got them from. You may have to look them up yourself. Some of the emerging substances, we're going to have to either derive our own or, use some rather exotic sources for those TRVs. But the intent is to be as transparent as we possibly can for everybody. We started that at the beginning, way back in '95. We were the first to kind of do that. So, yeah, it's not as, boy, everybody is so serious out there. Look at Greggy. Okay, yeah, it's not going to be as scary as everybody thinks, believe me.
Should stakeholders be trying to line up meetings during these time periods that you've identified?
Certainly when they're posted, if you really want to have a meeting, let us know. But as I say, we're going to have, we have to do this in a little bit of a coordinated way. So we may not meet with, we may have, like we did before, where we have 3 or 4 stakeholders groups in the room, because we figure they're going to be interested particularly in Schedule 11 changes, let's say, right? So we'll have a special meeting for them. But yeah, if you, I know, Jim, you represent UDI, and UDI is on the list for focused stakeholder consultations. So, but anybody who wants to meet with us on this stuff should, the minute they come out, just say, I want a meeting. Yeah. One last question.
Do you have a sense, just looking at the numbers so far, of are we going more stringent or less stringent, or is there a bit of a theme maybe?
Okay, there will be winners and losers. At this point, that's about the best I can tell you. There will be, standards that become less stringent. Some will become more stringent. You'll just have to wait and see how they crank out. That's another thing you'll be hired to do. Okay, can I move on, please? Okay, so this is the more technical talk. Relates to environmental health. Standards, the matrix standards to protect environmental health, and I think you all know that the soil and vertebrate plant standard is one of the 2 mandatorily applicable standards in the regulations. So you don't ask the question, do I have invertebrates and plants at my site? That standard applies to your site, irrespective of the use of the site. There are some other ones as well. There's the soil and groundwater protective standards for aquatic life, livestock watering, irrigation, and on agricultural lands we have livestock soil ingestion standards, and we have microbial functional standards. So I won't show you the matrix again in the interest of time. You saw it before. So under Schedule 5, when the original soil and vertebrate and plants matrix standards were developed, those are colloquially known as the worm and lettuce standards. It's shorter, so I'm going to call them the worm and lettuce standards from here on in. But those worm and lettuce standards were derived in accordance with the 1996 CIS protocol, and virtually all of them were based on compilation of toxicity data, the primary source being the CCME 1995-1996 worm and lettuce database. So that's where we had the data from. Since that time, CCME has continued to work diligently on its database. So for existing substances, there's new toxicity studies to augment the ones that were back there in 95, 96. And there's new substances that have been added to that toxicity database. And as I'm sure you're all aware, in 2008, CSR was amended so that it introduced wildland standards to the reg, this new land use category, wildlands. And as I mentioned previously, right now we don't have purpose-derived wildland standards. We use agricultural or parkland standards as, close enough for government work, surrogate standards for wildlands. And the CIS protocol, on which all of these worm and lettuce standards are based, didn't anticipate the need for wildland standards. So we need to address that. We need to have proper accurate, true wildland standards developed for use under the CSR. Okay, so what substances am I talking about? Well, the substances that are shaded in green on this slide are those substances which we know there's enough data in the CCME database. That database has been augmented by studies from Ontario and some studies from EPA. And there's enough information for these green listed substances to actually derive new soil invertebrate and plant standards. Okay, and for the yellow shaded substances, these are ones where there's probably enough data in the database to derive soil invertebrate and plant standards. And you'll see that some of these substances are already listed in Schedule 4, or there's already matrix standards for them in Schedule 5. There's some, like PFOS and uranium, sulfolane, which aren't prescribed right now in the regulation, but for which we could develop standards, these worm and lettuce standards for. So I can tell you right now, we're going to do it for PFOS because we don't do it for, there's enough data to do it for human health as well. So that one's pretty much a given. We're going to do PFOS. Some of these other ones we haven't made up our mind about yet. But anyway, there's a fair number of substances for which this particular standard, revised standard, could be developed, and Remy Odens will be very busy cranking these things out over the next little while. It's a bit of a complicated process that I'm going to get into here on how you guys wanted technical stuff, so here it comes. So how did we do it originally? 1996 CIS protocol. What we did was we took for each substance, we took the database, the toxicity results for that substance. We divided them into two groups, one group dealing with lethal data, one group dealing with non-lethal data. Then we ran a regression line through those two groups, and we set the standard for agricultural, parkland, and residential standards. We set the standard as the lesser of the EC50 as determined by the regression line, or the LC20 as determined by the regression line. And for commercial industrial, we set the standard as the greater of the EC50 or the LC20 values. So I have this is probably the oldest spreadsheet I own. These way back to 1995-ish, somewhere around there, but and I haven't given you all the data and all the rest of it. But here's the lethal data, and the red line here is the predicted line. You can see there's a pretty decent R-square value there, pretty good correlation coefficient. So these little red points that represent the predicted match up pretty well with the little yellow triangles which represent the observed data. So a pretty good correlation there, pretty good fit for the lethal data pool. Not quite so good for the non-lethal data pool. There's still a good correlation coefficient amongst these 3 points, and subsequently we went back and looked at the actual study on which this particular observed concentration was based. There was problems with their controls. Their controls weren't appropriate. They weren't perfect, so we chucked that one out and actually developed the EC50 estimate on the basis of the predictive regression line. So historically that's how we set soil invertebrate and plant standards. Okay. So in 2009, we asked the SAB if they could come up with a better, more scientifically defensible way to set these standards than what we did back in 1995, 1996. So they took about a year and a half and came back with a alternate method on how to set agricultural, residential, parkland, and commercial industrial standards. And the mechanism that they came up with was very good for those two particular groups, but the ministry does have some issues with the way that they propose that these standards be derived. First is that it's fairly labor intensive to do work through their protocol, their proposed protocol. It's a fairly complicated approach. We find that it's often unworkable for the typical data sets that we see for most substances. Most substances, we don't have a big giant database. We have a very small, tiny little database. And I'm going to work through this a little bit more detail, and you'll see why that's a problem in a minute. Furthermore, the approach discards the low-end effects and high-end effects in that database series. Their approach does not consider the slope of the dose response curve, and that's a very important aspect. If you have a very, very steep dose response curve, you're going to see very little differences between the standards, right? The concentrations are going to be very close to one another. If you have a very flat, very less steep dose response curve, you're going to see pretty large differences between the two. So it's important to know the slope of your distribution, because it's going to tell you something about how critical a change in those particular those standards might be. And their method doesn't do that. And finally, usually the SAB method returns a more stringent standard than the old cyst regression analysis does. Not all the times, but many times. So here it is in a little bit more detail. So SAB takes the combined plant and invertebrate database, splits it into two groups, a group for plants and a second group for invertebrates. Then it takes, for the plants and the animals, it splits them again, so that you now have lethal and non-lethal groups for animals and plants. Then they identify two median effects ranges, first being the low effects range, the LUR, so that's one of the acronyms we're going to have to add to Procedure 8, that represents the geometric mean between the EC50 and EC35 value. It does that for plants, animals, lethal, non-lethal. And then it does a MUR, moderate effects range, geometric mean between 35 and 65%, and it does that for plants, animals, lethal, non-lethal. So you take that data step and effectively cut and dice it up into 8 critical values. And remember, these data sets are itty-bitty most of the time. They're not great big data sets. Anyway, SAP kind of realized that they were perhaps splitting it a little too fine most of the time. So then what they do is they recombine some of them. So for the low effects range, non-lethal, they will identify the lower of the animal or the plant non-lethal LUR. And they'll do that for the lethal LURs. And they'll do that for the non-lethal MERS. And they'll do it for the non-lethal MERS. So they take their 8 values and convert them into 4 values. The 4 values represent the lowest of the combined animal and plant LURs and MERS. And then they set the standards as follows. So for agricultural, parkland, and residential standards, the standard is the lesser of the LUR non-lethal and the LUR lethal. And for commercial industrial, the standard is the lesser of the MER non-lethal and the MER lethal. And for wildlands, they said, why don't you set wildlands as the parkland value times the ratio of this should say agricultural, parkland, and residential to commercial industrial. So there's a little equation, right? Wildlands equals parklands times this thing divided by that thing. The easiest way to wrap your mind about it is shove some numbers in there. So ag, residential, and parklands 50, commercial, industrial is 100. Plunk it in the equation, you get 50 times 50 divided by 100, you end up with a wildland standard of 25. Right? So that's their method. So what we're proposing is kind of a compromise between both of the approaches. We want to have a preferred method. The preferred method would be based on a regression analysis like the original CIST 1995 method was based on, but somewhat more simplified than what we did before, and somewhat more statistically appropriate and correct than the way we did it before. So take the data and we'll just plunk them into 4 bins. So the first bin would be the first quatrile. That would be 0 to 24 effects. Not distinguishing between lethal and non-lethal anymore, just all the effects data between 0 and 24 goes into one bin. 2549 goes in the second bin. 5074 goes in the third bin. 75 and 100 goes in the fourth bin. That's what's called quatriles, right? And we run our regression line. We calculate the geometric mean for each of those bins, run a regression line through that. And we set the standard as provided the regression is statistically appropriate. It's good regression, so we have a correlation coefficient criteria. It has to be at 0.75 or better. We'd set the standard for ag, res, and park as the predicted 25% effects value off the regression line. Commercial industry would be predicted 50% effects line off the regression line, and wildlands would be the predicted 15% effects value. Okay, and I have a little blurb here that shows you what we've done for arsenic. So this is the new arsenic. There's more arsenic data than there was in 1995. Not quite that old, almost at 75. Anyway, the blue line is the regression line for these quatrile values here, right? And the red line is the observed. And you can see that there's not a bad fit there. I mean, the R squared value isn't that horrible. So we would simply take the predicted EC15 value for wildlands, EC25 for ag, res, and parkland, and the EC50 for commercial industrial. Okay, but that doesn't always work. Sometimes your correlation coefficient is not good enough to pass statistical muster. In other words, it's less than 0.5. So the backup is to essentially do a much scaled back, much more simplified SAB kind of analysis, where we take the database and throw it into two bins. The first bin being called the LUR bin, the low effects range bin. All the data, all the EC data between 10 and 35 would fall into that bin. And then the second bin would be the MER bin, the moderate effects range. All the data between 40 and 65 would fall in there. We'd do the geometric means for those two bins, set the standard so that the ag, res, and park is the LUR value. Commercial industrial is the MER value. And wildlands would be set to the parkland value divided by some kind of constant, right? So it might be 1.5 if you want a slightly less stringent wildlands standard, or 2 if you wanted a more stringent one. So that's what we're going to do. That's what we propose to do for soil invertebrate plants. Anybody have any questions or concerns? That.
Any plan of incorporating provincial background concentration?
We do that after the numbers are calculated. We make adjustments for two things. One is analytical detection by reasonably standardized methods. So if we've set a standard, a tox-based standard that's less than the analytical detection limit for the method, we make an adjustment and adjust it up to the analytical detection limit of the method. If we set a standard that is lower than our provincial background estimate, we'd adjust it to the provincial background estimate. But there's a whole separate process to get you relief for background under the CSR. So we have regional background estimates that you can use. And there's a protocol called Protocol 4 that tells you how to figure out what background is. So that's taken care of. Scary stuff.
Working up in Northeast BC,
Yeah.
it looks like, it's all based on parkland to a certain depth and then commercial.
Yeah, we have a separate, Martin, we have a separate process that we're working with BC Upstream Petroleum Environmental Committee. So CAP has led a contract to Dr. Doug Bright to hopefully develop wetland or muskeg soil standards to deal specifically with salt. And if that quantity is supposed to run the course of the year, if he has, and the ministry is a participating member on that committee that's steering that work. If that contract bears fruit and we have specific muskeg or wetland standards for salt, at the time that we're ready to go forward with the stage 6, we will incorporate them into stage 6. If it's going to take a little longer, then we will incorporate it as part of the next cycle of updating.
And right now it's based on parkland. And so if you take the 15%
it won't be those kind of numbers.
Okay.
It'll be different set of numbers that's specific for wildlands, or for wetlands, sorry.
Well, this is wildlands. I'm talking wildlands. Like,
Yep. But
you say you're using the lower values now.
Yes.
And before they're based on parkland, so it's going to be a big change.
it is going to be lower. That's exactly right. We had that question actually when I presented this at the BEST conference a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember who asked. Oh, it was an oil and gas guy that asked me that. Yeah, he said, "Why EC15? Why can't it be, EC25 like parkland?" So that's basically your question. Yeah, okay.
Right now they use parkland to a certain depth.
Yes, that's true. In our view, wildlands are unmanaged lands. They aren't managed by human beings. It's not like a park. An urban park is a highly managed environment. There's lots of people out there, mowing lawns and making sure that if your roses have diseases, you take them out, you fertilize it, the whole bit. Wildlands have to be self-sustaining. You clean them up and you walk away from them. So they got to be able self-sustaining. So in our view, they require a little bit more protection built into the standard than would be provided by parkland standards, for example. Yep. It won't be just the oil and gas guys. If we have wildland standards, those will be applicable province-wide. There are other wildlands than in Northeast BC. Yeah. Okay. So I didn't hear great rounds of enthusiasm for all of this. Yeah.
Maybe I missed this. It sounded like there were two proposals still on the table there. What's your process for working through the options and choosing one? Like, is there room for discussion? Like, how's that going to work? The process of choosing which method?
Which of the soil and urban plants methods we would use?
Yeah.
Our clear preference is to use method 1, that's a regression analysis. And as long as it returns a correlation coefficient of 0.75 or greater, that's what it's going to be. If you fail that, then we go to the modified simplified.
Okay, so it's primacy on the first one, and then, okay, I missed that.
And the reason is because, again, the dose response curve and the relationship, right? We need to know that. So I'm sorry to my colleagues because I've burned up some of your time. But anyway, at least now you're all informed. And if you have any concerns that you don't want to, if you'd like to give me your concerns or your advice, I'd welcome that. So please don't hesitate to email me what you think. Thanks very much.
We've got Heather Oschoff.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
And
I'll go quick.
Yeah, okay. All right,
Okay,
it's all
I'll go
yours.
quick. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
So the plan was for Glenn to be a little shorter so I could get this in before coffee. So I'm going to go quick, and I can go pretty quick. So I'm talking about the proposed changes to revise water standards in the CSR. And I'm going to run through what I'm going to just use as my acronyms. So there's 2 relevant schedules of water in the CSR. Schedule 6, it has the protection for aquatic life, AW, protection for irrigation water, IW, livestock watering, LW, and protection for drinking water for human health, DW. I have some sources of where they came from. I think the quick way to say is that they were all adopted from BCMOE, CCME, or Health Canada. The IW, LW, and DW standards were adopted pretty much as they were. They haven't been altered much since. And the AW standard is, as you all know, a 10-fold multiplication of the BC Water Quality Guideline. And I'm proposing to leave the 10-fold multiplication factor as it is in this update. And I have a history slide on it, but I think I will skip that. And recently there were generic numerical DW standards derived for aluminum, iron, manganese. And Glyn did this using the Health Canada Drinking Water Guideline derivation equations and the Health Canada receptor characteristics and the US EPA toxicity reference values, or TRVs. In other words, they were tox-based derivations, and that's what I'm proposing to move towards, as we all are, is move towards tox-based derivations. I have the history slide. I believe the presentation will be available after. You can go through this. As I said, I'm planning on leaving the 10-fold factor as it is, and there's somewhat a rationale there. In essence, it's an assumption that there's a minimum of 10-to-1 dilution present at most sites with contamination where groundwater is an issue. The second relevant schedule that has water standards in the CSR is Schedule 10. There's generic numerical soil and water standards in this schedule, and of course I'm just talking about the drinking water standards in the last column. The source of these standards come from the US EPA regional screening levels. This is available online, and for drinking water standards, it's the 5th or 6th one listed, residential tap water. Okay, my changes. So I'm proposing 3 areas of change. The first is to repeal the existing CSR schedules 6 and 10 and move all of the substances into a new consolidated Schedule W. During this process for Schedule 10, that means updating this standard values as they're ported into the new schedule, and the drinking water standards in Schedule 10 then would be updated using the most recently available US EPA regional screening levels, and this would also include a modification. The US EPA regional screening levels has a 10 to the minus 6 inherent risk level, and we use 10 to the minus 5, and so we would use a 10-fold multiplication factor as we ported them into the new revised water schedule. The second change within this would be to list the substances in the new water schedule by alphabetical naming, probably by IUPAC, and we would add a CAS number as well to make this consistent with other CSR schedules and very easy to use. No longer would there be in water, the new water schedule, listing by subgroup, by family or related substances. They'll all be one big long list, about 250 substances. And again, I'm planning on retaining the 10-fold factor, and I can talk about that at another point in time for the calculation of the AW standards. I'm going to go quick. So the next big area of change is that where there's sufficient toxicological information or another jurisdiction has an available standard, subject to the ministry's time and resources, the plan is to derive or adopt aquatic life or drinking water standards for substances. And it's really important to note that if there isn't time for a particular substance where such updates aren't possible this round in stage 10, the standard values will remain as they are currently listed. The priority right now is to derive first and adopt second. The priority is drinking water first, aquatic life second. IW and LW have been deferred to the next round, as well as any other substances that aren't able to be updated in this round. The third area of change is that where there's sufficient toxicological information or data or another jurisdiction has an available standard, to derive or adopt standards for new and emerging compounds of concern. And we have made this short list here of families. So there's a longer list. What we considered as criteria is that they had to be important environmental contaminants in BC, and there had to be available analytical chemistry methods. And these all qualify for that. So for perfluorinated compounds, we'll be adding PFOS, hopefully PFOA, and other perfluorinated substances, depending on how much tox data is available. For the estrogen hormones, we'll be adding EE2. I have a slide on that later. For the antimicrobials, things like triclosan and triclocarban. The alkylphenols and alcohol ethoxylates will be adopted from the federal standards that are out. New current use pesticides, PBDEs will be added, and hardness. And hardness is a parameter that's a little bit different. We'll add it if we can. It is going to be subject to another department in our ministry who's working on hardness guidance and possibly a hardness guideline. And if that information is available within this process, then we could adopt that. So the priority first is derivation, the second is adoption, DW's another priority first, and AW second. So I'm going to talk quite a bit about DW derivations and some of the parameters that need to be stated, I think, as a part of this update process. So the plan for the DW calculations is that they'll follow the iron, aluminum, manganese derivations that Glenn did, use the Health Canada calculations, Health Canada receptor characteristics, and the US EPA IRIS TRVs. And I have a TRV selection hierarchy in 2 slides. Again, during the derivations, it's important to note that we'll maintain the 10 to the minus 5 risk level that's inherent in the CSR. And again, the emphasis is on tox-based derivations and adoptions. We want to be transparent, science-based, and use scientifically credible adoptions as well. So some of the ways this could affect thinking about standards to be tox-based, we're considering replacing taste and odor standards with tox-based derivations. That would be a deviation from things previously. We're also considering using additional information about routes of exposure or important receptors. So for example, inhalation from showering is an important route of exposure for drinking water standard derivations. If there are 2 sources of TRV information available, if there's an RFD available for non-carcinogenic threshold dose, or if there's an oral slope factor available for carcinogenic effects, we'll calculate the standard using both TRVs or both sources of information, and the value calculated that's lower will be selected. The next point's the one that's a little bit tricky to discuss with you. My goal is to move, or my preference is to move towards tox-based derivations. However, that may not be possible if there's other jurisdictions that have given us drinking water guidelines that we need to use. So in the past, we've adopted our DWs from Health Canada and BCMOE. During this process, I'll show you some examples. I found that some standards go up, some standards remain the same, and some go down. And so it's a little bit tricky because it may not be possible to have drinking water standards that go up because there's other jurisdictions that may not agree or allow us to do that. So in essence, what I'm trying to say is that during this move to tox-based derivations, it's possible that drinking water standards would only ever remain the same or go down. It may not be possible for them to go up. And I'd like stakeholder feedback on that one. Of course, if there's conservative parameters that I can use that will result in a lower standard value, that'll be used. Maybe the toddler receptor is more sensitive to a particular substance, or if there's a continuous lifetime exposure that's known, that's widely accepted. It's not like we'll pick for substances. It needs to be scientifically credible, transparent, and available from other jurisdictions. So the hierarchy of sources for TRVs or tox-based information, or even for adoption of standards, is going to follow Technical Guidance 7 loosely. I've laid it out here though, and this is in my proposal paper. So US EPA is going to be the first source, particularly IRIS for TRVs, and then Health Canada, BCMOE, CCME, and the Federal Environmental Quality Guidelines. And then after that, there's other sources that we may use. The World Health Organization, other Canadian provinces, states, European Union agencies, or other nations in the British Commonwealth. So I have 3 examples. They're relatively quick. So TCE. In the CSR Schedule 6, currently, the DW standard is set at 5 micrograms per liter. Is there a pointer? No? Okay, so we adopted that from Health Canada as a drinking water standard. On the bottom in gray, the drinking water standards from the other jurisdictions, Health Canada on the left and US EPA on the right. If you use the most recent information available from Health Canada, if you use the PQRA Part 2 information for a TRV, it's a TDI, and you do the Health Canada drinking water calculation, you use Health Canada's ingestion rate for TCE. It has an increased ingestion rate because of inhalation from showering. You can calculate the drinking water standard to be 5.2. And if you do the same calculation, this is likely how they derive their 5. You do the same calculation, though, moving to a tox-based US EPA is the first source. Using a reference dose from the US EPA, the receptor characteristics that we will use, you calculate it to be 4.7. Assume with rounding that these numbers are pretty much the same. There will be rounding. I'm just going to keep moving on. So in essence, what I'm saying is that it would appear that this standard would not change for TCE, although moving to a tox-based approach and the US EPA is the first source of information means that we're just moving in a different direction, I guess, from Health Canada. Second one is PCE, tetrachloroethylene. The Schedule 6 drinking water standard is currently 30. We adopted that from Health Canada. If you use the PQRA information, which is the most available Health Canada or up-to-date Health Canada information, do the calculation, you would actually calculate the new standard using Health Canada's PQRA to be 132. So that would appear to go up. But I'm planning on moving towards US EPA. And when you calculate it using the reference dose, you calculate it to be 57 micrograms per liter. The oral slope factor is 505. I said before that if there's two sources of information, we would select the lower value in order to determine a drinking water standard. So in essence, you'd think we'd be going towards 57. With rounding, that could be 55 or 60, depending on the rounding rules. But as I said before, we may not be able to. We may not be allowed or encouraged or agreed from other jurisdictions. So perhaps then the PCE drinking water standard wouldn't change. It would remain at 30. So I have another one, vinyl chloride. The Schedule 6 drinking water standard is set at 2. This is actually adopted from Health Canada. It's a policy-based drinking water standard. If you read the document, Health Canada itself recommends 1. For some reason, they've selected 2. I think it has to do with treatment options. If you use the Health Canada information from PQRA Part 2, you calculate a drinking water standard of 4. So it's not the same, obviously. If you use the US EPA information, you get 2 different values. The non-carcinogenic reference dose gives you 28. The carcinogenic oral slope factor gives you 0.7. So if we were to move to this that I'm recommending, the new drinking water standard for vinyl chloride would go down. It would be 0.7. Okay, I have a very simple adoption example and I'm done. So this would be an aquatic life adoption example. There's a BC water quality guideline that was released in 2012 for EE2. Ethanol estradiol, EE2, is a synthetic hormone, birth control pill hormone. The BC water quality guideline is a 30-day mean of 0.5 nanograms per liter. So the AW, using that tenfold factor, would calculate to be 5 nanograms per liter of EE2. So the upper cap concentration would be 50. And that's well within what's measured in the BC environment. So that's it. I have a summary, and then it's coffee time. So the plan is to combine Schedules 6 and 10 only for the drinking water standards, into the new schedule, water schedule, Schedule W for now. Along the way, we'll update the Schedule 10 values based on the most recent US EPA regional screening levels and the adjustment for the inherent risk level from 10 to the minus 6 to 10 to the minus 5. Plan is to update the Schedule 6 standards by derivation or adoption using a hierarchy of sources for tox information and or for the standards themselves, such as adopting PFAS. The plan is to retain the tenfold factor for calculating the AW standards and derive and adopt standards for emerging substances, derivation where possible first, and that includes that list I'd shown, PFAS, EE2, nonylphenol, nonylphenol ethoxylates, as well as others. There's about 20. Again, the focus is on DW standards first, AW standards second, and deferring IW and LW to a later point in time, the next round of amendments. There, I'm quick. Please email me with comments or questions.
Just a comment, if we're going to be looking for estrogens down at 5 nanograms per liter, we're going to have to change the way we install wells, no plastics, no more peristaltics, large volume samples. It's going to affect a lot of things if you want to actually do this properly.
But an estrogen like this is a prescription pharmaceutical. It's not coming out of pipes. Phthalates could come out of pipes.
It's in groundwater, but we have to test for
It very well could be, but the detection level is lower than that. It's 0.5. Your numerical standard would be 5. Your upper cap would be 50. You're well with
nanogram per liter. My point is,
Yeah.
a nanogram, once it contacts polyethylene, it's stuck to the side in about a nanosecond. You'll never see it in your sample. So you got to change the way we do. We have to change the way we do our business.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, with the way the world's going, the background numbers on things like estrogen, we know that they're in ponds and they're affecting frogs. You know, I don't know. I think you better take a big look at that, because you saw that other presentation we had showed downtown Vancouver where some people have applied drinking water because it's easier, because they do it. But now, with these coming out, they're going to have to prove that drinking water does not apply, which I guess doesn't take too much. A lot of work for hydrogeologists, but it's going to change things, just so you know.
Okay.
In the real.
you're actually talking to the person that's measured estrogens in the environment for over a decade. So I'm pretty well aware of what's out there, and it's not found everywhere. It's not ubiquitous. But we're looking at biosolids applications, leachability. You know, we have responsibilities as well.
One question or clarification on the aesthetic-based standards and the changes proposed for those. When iron and manganese were derived, essentially the former Canadian drinking water quality guidelines that were aesthetically based were kind of left behind, and new values proposed. Does that apply? Like, one of the obvious examples for most people in this room would be ethylbenzene, which the tox-based value is going to exceed 1,000 micrograms per liter, and the current standard is 2.4. Is it intended that that 2.4 then is put aside and not retained because it's a Health Canada value, and that'll happen? And is that sort of confirmed that that's the intent?
That's the proposal. Intent, sure. We'll have to see where we're positioned in 6 months. So yeah, moving to the tox-based derivation for ethylbenzene means it would go up quite a lot. I can't tell you what if Health Canada is going to support us in this or not. Or provincial, municipal, local. Yeah, it's a challenge. I'm not exactly sure how it's going to go. I'll tell you in a year.
Better idea once the stakeholder consultation period is closed, right? In September. But
Okay, I'll tell you in 2 months.
yeah, there you go.
Okay, thanks everyone.